I've been in recovery now for 5 years, a little over 5 years. February 13th, 2020 is my sobriety date. I got to this stage basically when I was about 18 or 19 years old. I started to self-destruct, with the passing of a close family member who died by suicide. And, ever since then, I was like, it had so much guilt inside of me. I was the only one he ever told that he wanted to do this. And like, at that age, I'm like, what do I do with this information I'm just given? And I didn't know what to do. So I held it in and didn't tell anybody about it. So when it happened, I'm like, dang, what was I supposed to do? I should have told somebody. Maybe he'd still be here. Maybe this and maybe that. I just start drinking to suppress all that guilt and all those emotions. So I held on to that for 20 years. So I was in active addiction for 20 plus years, until I tried getting sober on my own and it didn't work and I just didn't want it. And eventually came to the point where I was broken, completely broken, not knowing what to do. And it was at the time that I wanted to take my own life where I was like, whoa, this is not what I want to do. And, from there, getting the help that I needed. So yeah, brief overview.
Yeah, that's great, man. So you went through the guilt and shame. You finally hit bottom. You had a turning point. When did you finally surrender to recovery? Was it, in the early recovery, was it challenging trying to stay clean? Was it a challenge there?
Absolutely, it was. Because like I said, I tried to do it so many times on my own, and there was something there. It just wasn't working, and when I came to that point, I did my little stints in jail and rehabs prior and, meeting after meeting and just everything I tried to do to get it taken care of, to get this done. And it just wasn't working. And when I wanted to take my own life, that was when I was like I was ready. I was completely ready to do this. It was in my mind. This is the only way out. The disease was telling me, look, I got you to this point. This is your only way out now. So at that point, I was like, I'm going to do this. And something happened. I'm in the process of texting my wife and tell her, hey, you got to pick up the kids today. I'm not going to be here. That was a very, very hard thing to do, but I was ready to do it because the disease was telling me you need to do it.
Yeah.
And I accidentally called this pastor. And I had never spoken to him ever. I had his number because my dad gave it to me, but never spoken to him. And I accidentally called him, and I remember that day when the phone was ringing. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen. I couldn't hang up. I couldn't do anything. And he answered, and I'm like completely broke down. I need help. I know you're not equipped to do this, but I need something. Him and I met. That was the turning point for me getting into, this is it. This has to happen now. I got through talking with him, contacted Ashley Treatment Center here locally in Maryland and booked me a room, and I started on my journey there.
Good deal. So, okay, so you talked to the pastor. I guess he helped you out a lot with your journey. What were some encouraging things that he was sharing with you?
Well, he is the only one that ever introduced, I guess you could say, prayer to me. I had never prayed before in my life, unless it was like in baseball, I pray that I get a home run or something like that. But it was like never actually sat down and really prayed. And he asked me to do that day. And I didn't know how. God and myself, we had a relationship where it was like, I believe in you. And that's as far as it went. That's as far as my religion went. And that day when I prayed, I was like, this feels right. You know what I mean? So, and on this journey, he helped me start my group that I have that I run every week called Breaking the Silence. He helped me start that with the church, and he's been a huge support ever since day one. Ever since my first day, my first journey to this road to recovery.
So the church is the foundation. Will you say this church is like the foundation of your recovery?
I would say that. Yes, definitely. There's a lot of other factors that goes into it, but I would say, yeah, the church was the stepping stone. If you would ask me over 5 years ago, would I be interested in attending church, and could you see yourself allowing this to help you? There ain't no way.
I'm proud of you, man. So I see you're an advocate for addiction recovery, mental health. How have that mental health and that addiction, how that interact in part of your journey?
Absolutely. So I dealt with depression and anxiety and things like that growing up, and it kind of, because mental health and addiction, they go hand in hand. You know, you take one, you take drugs or alcohol to suppress, you know, mental health, depression, and things like that. Thinking, you know, so you can suppress all that emotions. So eventually, in my process of active addiction, that's exactly what I was doing. I was also medicating my depression and my anxiety. And the more I got depressed, the more I would drink. And the more I drink, the more depressed I'd get. So it was like this ongoing process that was never ending. It was just a constant loop.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you know, and then get to the point to where I wanted to take my own life. That was the deepest, darkest I've ever gotten in my life, was at that point.
Okay. So how do you deal with, you're in recovery now, how do you deal with those hard times when life challenges shows up or you're going through some emotional pain? Now that you're in recovery, what do you do now to deal with those type of feelings?
Yeah, so I have a huge support system that I lean on quite often. My wife is my biggest supporter, to be honest. She takes a brunt of my emotions when I get to that point. But when I got sober, I knew something had to be different. I couldn't just get sober. I had to work on myself. I had to work on things that I hadn't dealt with before. You know, trauma from that incident when I was 18, 19 years old, all the way through my recovery. So I had to get sober, but I had to work on my character defects. I had to
Okay.
enroll myself into counseling. The biggest one for me was trauma counseling. I had to get me a trauma therapist to dig really deep down into myself to find out what's going on. So, you know, doing all that, learning and just doing all my research that I can to find out why this even happened to me and what I was going through and things like that. So I did a lot. When I got out of rehab, I wanted to find out exactly why and how this happened to me. So I did do a lot of research, bought a lot of books, and just was in people's ear asking questions. And, you know, I live every single day for that moment. I don't think about, you know, there are certain things you got to schedule in the future, but
Uh-huh.
I don't think about what's coming after. I always am living in that moment because I don't know, you know, I'm sober right now, but I don't know what's going to happen even after we get off this podcast here. So, you know, I got to think about in the moment. And that's been helping me a lot. It really does. And it's so cliche that we talk about one day at a time in recovery, but it literally is. And once you get to realize that, and once you figure out that it's much more than a cliche, then, you know, it gets a lot easier. And you have to have a big support system. A very good
Yeah.
support system is key.
Yeah. Yeah. That doing that internal work, was it easy to you? Was it painful? What was your journey like? You said you was getting to the core of what's going on with you and things like that. What was it like for you?
It was emotional. I had to figure who I really am. And I think the hardest part was when I wrote my book. It's also called Breaking the Silence: My Journey from Addiction to Healing. When I wrote that, I think that's the realest I ever got with myself. You know, doing the therapy and things like that, I had somebody to talk back and forth with.
Okay.
Sitting down in my own little world, writing down these feelings and writing this book was super therapeutic. I think that was the hardest. I cried, you know, I got mad. All the emotions that you could get, that you could have when going through something like this, that's when it hit me the most. Definitely writing those feelings out, because now I'm taking accountability for everything that I've done, all the relationships that I ruined, all the people that I've hurt. You know, it's starting to become real, and I'm getting upset. At that point, I was getting upset, like, I just ruined so many people's lives, and they probably moved on, and, you know, they either hate me or they just don't even care, and, you know, they moved on. But I'm here realizing that I hurt so many people. So that was hard for me.
Yeah, that part right there was hard for me also, because one of the hardest part of my recovery journey is forgiving myself for all the people that I hurt. What about you? Was it hard for you to forgive yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Because I'm like, how can I forgive myself for what I did to them? You know what I mean? That was really hard because am I taking away the fact that I did hurt them by forgiving myself? Is it wrong for me to forgive myself and move on and act like, on the outside it didn't happen, but like, do those people look at me like I'm acting like it didn't happen? So that was really hard because I want those to know that, I do feel, I do understand, and I do know that I hurt you, but I also have to move on. And so, yeah, it was completely hard to forgive myself because of that. I don't want,
Yeah.
I don't want others to think that I just had forgotten about the hurt.
Right, right. You say you're talking about you made some amends too with some of the people. Was it some people, in your amends part, was some people not as understanding and forgiving?
Yes, especially my wife. And when I was going through my amends, I didn't realize that it's not physically calling someone or seeing them and saying I'm sorry. It's much more than that. Yeah, but it was hard for me to with my wife because the trust was gone. She looked at me completely different, and she knew that that's not the person that she married. And now I'm left here to basically say I'm sorry, but not saying it. I have to show you that I have changed. And that was hard because, there were things that I had to learn that she still didn't get over. There were triggers that I caused that she was still not over. And sometimes it would get me mad, like, why can't you just not think about that? Like, and so I had to learn that it's going to take some time, and that doesn't happen overnight. But
Yeah.
yeah, her and my parents, definitely, I hurt them just as bad with the lies, the deceit, and things like that, and the empty promises.
And the thing is about that, we hurt people. We hurt the parents. We hurt, you know, children. I don't know if you have children. We hurt the wives. And the thing is, they are recovering too, right? So, but they're recovering on their own journey and on their time. So we have to be very patient in that area. You know what I mean? So we won't cause any more harm because, like you say, I've been through that myself. I'm like, come on now, I'm not doing that no more. But hey, we have to be patient. And that's the importance. That's the importance of make sure you stand connected with a sponsor and a fellowship and things like that. Now there are families out there, Damien. What you think about the people who want to help their kids who are using drugs, right? But without enabling? What advice would you give them how to support their kids as they try to get off drugs?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the key word there is enabling, because there's such a fine line where, families, they want to help their loved one. I remember my wife doing the same thing, and there's such a fine line where enabling and helping can run into each other. I would honestly say that they have to do it. You have to learn that they have to do it for themselves. As much as you want to help them, you don't want to see them go down that road. It is a very hard thing to watch a loved one just completely self-destruct and not do anything. I would suggesting rehabs and things like that, and trauma therapy, but that would be because what you don't want to do too is you don't want to push them farther away from you. For the families, I would say getting yourself some therapy as well, some counseling with a professional, and they are able to help you through this journey as well, because there are programs out there for loved ones. My wife went through it with me and at the rehab that I went to at Ashley, but there are programs out there that help you deal with that, to walk that line of enabling and helping. So I would strongly suggest doing that, because there are so many things that you can do and you think it might be right, and you might be, the tough love thing is always what a lot of families want to do, is that tough love. Sometimes that can backfire on you. So you want to learn how to do that the correct way. So I totally suggest finding a therapist that specializes in something like this before taking it on yourself and then running the risk of pushing them away further into that addiction or mental health struggle.
Yeah. Thanks, man. That was some great advice right there, man. You have a powerful story, man. I really like how transparent you are. What keeps you motivated? keep sharing your story like this?
I struggled for so long in silence because of the stigma, because of the stereotypes and the judgments and the shame, the straight up shame. And there's nothing to be ashamed of for going through what you're going through. I really hate the stigma that surrounds this topic. So what motivates me to do this is to just be open about it. This addiction does not define me, who I am. Me going through recovery and helping others, it also helps myself. So I strongly suggest being open about it to the right people. You know, you just go to the grocery store and say, hey, I'm in recovery. You know, it's got to be the right time and place. But that's what keeps me motivated, is holding myself accountable. When I'm sharing my story and things that are very sacred to me, you know, they're very personal. It helps me stay accountable, because I remember when I was in active addiction and I was trying to get sober, I don't even know how many times, but I wouldn't tell anybody that I'm trying to get sober. That way, when I screw up and I go back to drinking, that I didn't skip a beat, because nobody knew I was trying to get sober anyway. So I had already relapsed or just didn't stop before I even tried to get sober. So that is my main motivation, is it helps me stay accountable, and that way I don't go back to what I was doing. I have to stay open about this.
Yeah. There's some people out there right now that's struggling. They might come across this episode here. They hopeless. They feel stuck. There's one thing you can say to them. What would you say to them right now if they listen?
You are loved and you matter. And just because you're in this, you know, downward slope, there is a way out. And I pray that you take that step. And, you know, it's 100 times harder to stay in recovery and things like that, but that should not stop you. You know, we have triggers every day that happen, and staying patient. When you take that first step, that is the bravest thing that you're ever going to do. And it is going to be the best thing that you ever do. And then when you're in that journey of recovery, staying patient, holding yourself accountable, and realizing that we're never going to beat this. And that's okay. We don't have to beat it completely. There's no finish line to this thing. Taking it one day at a time, taking sometimes 1 minute at a time, but just taking that time and taking that step. And, you know, I will be praying for everyone who is on this journey and thinking about taking this journey. It will do wonders. I promise you that.